Ready for some serious Cold War intrigue? We're about to uncover a side of the Faroe Islands you probably never knew existed.
It's a story that shows how even seemingly remote places got pulled into this global conflict, becoming pawns in a much bigger game.
We're talking secret installations, political maneuvering, the whole 9 yards. And the craziest part, we're unlocking this hidden chapter using declassified U.S. and Danish documents.
These documents paint a fascinating picture of the Faroe Islands. Right after World War II, Denmark, which the Faroe Islands are a part of, was trying to stay neutral.
Understandably. But with the Cold War heating up, that must have been tricky.
Oh, absolutely. And the Faroe Islands' location smack dab in the North Atlantic made them strategically important. Both the U.S. and the Soviet Union were watching them closely.
So even back then, the islands were caught in the middle of this power struggle.
Exactly. And one incident in 1946 really highlights those early tensions. A British warship was spotted sailing in Faroe's waters, flying the Danish flag.
Wait, what? Why was that a big deal?
Well, it raised all sorts of questions about sovereignty. Denmark was trying to assert its control over the islands.
But at the same time, they had to be careful not to alienate the Faroes people who wanted more autonomy.
Precisely. It was a delicate balancing act. And by the late 1950s, the U.S. was getting increasingly interested in what was happening in the Faroe Islands.
They were probably worried that the Soviets might try to take advantage of the situation.
Exactly. They started digging into Faroe's society, analyzing key political figures, especially those pushing for independence from Denmark.
Because any whiff of instability could be seen as an opportunity for the Soviets to gain influence. It was all about the domino theory back then.
Absolutely. And one name that pops up again and again in these U.S. documents is Erlander Patterson.
Wasn't he a leading figure in that pro-independence Joveldis Flokeren party?
That's the one. The U.S. saw these independence movements as potential threats, possible openings for the Soviets to exploit.
So they were trying to figure out how strong these movements really were and what their intentions were.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about politics. When the Faroe Islands hit a rough patch economically in the mid-1950s, the U.S. saw a chance to step in.
You mean with financial aid? That's interesting.
On the surface, it might seem like a purely helpful gesture, but the documents suggest a more strategic motive.
They probably saw it as a way to prevent the Faroe Islands from turning to the Soviet Union for support.
You got it. It was classic Cold War strategy using economic influence as a way to counter Soviet influence. They believed that a more prosperous Faroe Islands would be less likely to be swayed by communist ideas.
It's amazing how intertwined economics and politics were during that era. Everything was a chess move. So the U.S. is monitoring political figures, considering economic aid. What's next?
Well, this is where things get even more interesting. The U.S. decides to establish military installations in the Faroe Islands, all under the guise of improving navigational systems.
I've got a feeling there's more to this story. What kind of installations are we talking about?
One was the Loran Sea Station, built around 1959-1960. Now, Loran stands for Long Range Navigation.
Okay, so on the surface, it sounds pretty harmless. Just a way to help ships and aircraft figure out their location, right?
Right. But remember, this was the Cold War, and the U.S. was all about securing strategic advantages wherever they could.
So this Loran station,
Hmm.
it wasn't just about making navigation easier.
Exactly. These declassified documents reveal that it was a crucial part of the U.S. military infrastructure in the North Atlantic.
And I'm guessing they tried to keep that part quiet.
You bet. Both the U.S. and Denmark went to great lengths to downplay the military significance of these installations to the Faroese people. They knew it could cause a lot of anxieties and unrest.
Makes sense. But the Loran station wasn't the only installation, was it? There was also the Troposcatter station. What was that all about?
Ah, yes. That one played a vital role in the U.S. Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, or BMUWS. This system was designed to detect any incoming Soviet missiles.
Wow, talk about high stakes. That was top secret stuff during the Cold War.
Absolutely. And Denmark knew that having such a sensitive installation on Faroe soil could really ruffle some feathers.
So what did they do?
They insisted that this troposcatter station be tucked away, discreetly placed within the existing NATO site on the islands. They were trying to keep a low profile, avoid attracting too much attention.
Trying to appease both sides, their NATO allies and the Faroes people. Not an easy task.
Not at all. They were caught in the middle of this geopolitical tug of war. Remember, Denmark was trying to fulfill their NATO obligations without alienating the Faroes people, who were already sensitive about their autonomy. And remember how the U.S. was considering giving the Faroe Islands financial aid during their economic struggles?
Yeah, they were going through a rough patch back then.
Well, the documents reveal that the U.S. saw that as a strategic opportunity.
So it wasn't just about being charitable. There were ulterior motives at play.
Absolutely. They knew a weak economy could make the Faroe Islands vulnerable to Soviet influence.
Makes sense. Desperate times and all that.
Right. The U.S. was worried that if the Faroe Islands became too reliant on the Soviet Union for economic support, it could pull them further away from Denmark and the West. They saw it as a way to maintain stability and prevent the spread of communism.
It's fascinating how economic aid could be used as a tool during the Cold War.
Yeah.
But what about the Faroes people themselves? How did they feel about all of this? Did they just accept these military installations without question?
Well, the documents show a mixed bag of reactions. Some pharaohs welcomed the potential economic benefits, like new jobs and infrastructure.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's hard to argue with progress.
But others saw it as a threat to their autonomy. They felt like Denmark was making decisions about their homeland without really consulting them.
Especially the Tjoveldesløkkeren party, right? They were pretty vocal about their opposition to the militarization of the islands.
Exactly. They saw these installations as a dangerous escalation of the Cold War. They argued that these installations made the Faroe Islands a target, dragging them into a conflict they wanted no part of.
It's understandable why they would feel that way. So what did they do about it? How did they challenge this?
They organized protests, wrote articles criticizing the Danish government's lack of transparency, and really pushed for a referendum on self-determination.
They wanted the Faroes people to have a direct say in their future, free from outside pressure.
Exactly. They felt like the Danish government wasn't taking their concerns seriously, so they took their case directly to the people.
Did that strategy work? How did the Danish government handle this push for a referendum?
Well, imagine being stuck between a rock and a hard place. That was Denmark's situation.
Yeah, they were trying to keep both their NATO allies and the Faroes people happy. Not an easy thing to do.
Not at all. On one hand, they had the U.S. and NATO pressuring them to maintain these strategically important installations. On the other hand, they had the Faroes people demanding more autonomy and a say in their own affairs.
So how did they navigate that? What was their approach?
Well, the documents suggest they tried to find a middle ground. They met with Faroes leaders to hear their concerns and tried to reassure them that these installations were there to protect everyone, including the Faroes people. They also made an effort to minimize the negative impact of these installations on the environment and local communities.
It sounds like they were trying to strike a balance, trying to appease both sides without completely giving in to either.
Exactly. It was a delicate dance, and it highlights the complex web of international relations and internal pressures that Denmark was dealing with during the Cold War.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is.
These islands, seemingly so far removed from the main players in the Cold War, ended up playing a surprisingly significant role.
And the impact wasn't just on a geopolitical level. It really trickled down and affected the lives of everyday people in the Faroe Islands.
It makes you wonder, how much did the average person there really know about what was going on?
Right. And how did all this secrecy, these behind-the-scenes maneuverings, shape the relationship with Denmark in the long run?
I mean, these are questions that probably still resonate today.
Oh, absolutely. The legacy of the Cold War is still felt, even in places you might not expect.
It reminds us that history is never black and white.
Right. There are always so many layers, different perspectives, unintended consequences. And these documents, they offer such a valuable glimpse into all of that.
It's like piecing together a puzzle. You start to see the bigger picture, but you also discover these fascinating details you never would have imagined.
Exactly. It shows how interconnected everything was during the Cold War. What happened in one corner of the world could have ripple effects across the globe.
This deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
Likewise. And for our listeners, if you're intrigued by what you've heard today, we encourage you to delve into these sources yourselves.
There's nothing quite like uncovering history firsthand.
Exactly. Unraveling these hidden chapters, understanding how they've shaped our world today. It's fascinating stuff. Until next time.